Injuries are a part of football, but this week felt especially bad. So Jeff Bell and I were doing a special one-off episode just to talk about the injury fallout from week 11. And Jeff, I think we got to start with the Atlanta Falcons because it wasn't just Drake London, but it was also Michael Penix. And we are recording Monday night, so we're still working with an incomplete puzzle here right now. We don't have all of the information, but it sounds like Michael Penix is likely out for the season with a knee injury. For Drake London, we're hearing PCL sprain. He's already declared out for week 12. Our Adam Hutchinson says that he could miss up to 6 weeks here. So I don't even know what the purpose of the show is. Or are we just doing this to like commiserate about how much this all sucks?
Yeah, I mean, it's up there. You might want to add Raheem Morris to the list after losing these guys because this Falcons team should not be 3-7 under any circumstance at all. This is a team, they had high expectations. They thought they should have been in the playoffs last year, came down to week 18. They're not even close this year. And I don't know how the Bills lost to them. That's weird. But I think that when you look at these guys going down, I think you made a very good point about Jane Daniels on Twitter that I saw shortly before we started recording the show, where you're talking about, the expectation and they can list timelines and all these things. But if they're completely out of it, why are they going to play their quarterback? And we're starting to reach that point of the season where, I don't know, like Garrett Wilson, is that a guy? I don't know if that was like all the way hurt, or if that was, we know we're done. Garrett Wilson's been pushing it. He's on the limit. Let's just put him on IR so we keep him at least as healthy as we can moving forward. We're reaching shutdown point of the season. And that's probably one of the most unfortunate, frustrating things that we run into this time of year. I will say it did, as I was doing the Monday roundup this week, it just started to pop out of these guys that just off the radar. Like you guys that Isaiah Hodgins signed days before the game and goes out, catches 5 balls for 57 yards. You had Tyrell Shavers in Buffalo, goes 90 yards and a touchdown. You had Gabe Davis.
He's been on the field all season. Like Terrell Shavers was running routes, but then like in this game where they're like, we're excited to get Josh Palmer back out there and Gabe Davis back out there, and then Terrell Shavers, who's been out there all season, suddenly just like explodes and is the wide receiver one.
But Gabe Davis is another one where, we you almost are ready to write him out of the league. And now all of a sudden might be starting wide receiver in Buffalo. And you look at it, he's like only 26 years old. And it was only a year and a half ago that he was a starting wide receiver cemented in with Josh Allen. So you're running into, we get these guys this time of year. Who remembers 2023, the end of 2023, Demarcus Robinson was wide receiver 15 over the fantasy playoffs. So I think that while it's difficult to look at these injuries and look at these guys, Drake London's a guy that I have everywhere. I mean, Josh Jacobs is a guy that I was really heavy on. So losing these guys at this point of the year, really difficult, but you got to remember that there is production out there for other players to pick up.
And I think that's exactly it. And I just wrote this big, long intro to my article, which I guess this article will be out by the time the episode airs. So please check it out. It'll be my pinned tweet, my rest of season rankings article. But I talk about that is that like injuries are a part of football. It happens, and it is really unfortunate. But there was something that Dan Henry pulled last year when looking at our data from the Football Guys Bowl, and it stuck with me. And it was that players who drafted Rashee Rice were more likely to make the playoffs in Football Guys Bowl last year than average players. And I couldn't wrap my mind around that because, like, wait, you're telling me a guy who got injured in week 4, put up a 0 that week, was highly drafted. How is that even possible? And Dan's kind of explanation was Rashee Rice was a sharp pick, and people who drafted Rashee Rice made other sharp picks throughout their drafts that helped them offset that when it inevitably happened. And then I started looking at some of the injuries this year. Tucker Kraft, that's a sharp pick. Like there were reasons to fade Tucker Kraft, but if you took the chance on him, you got the top performing tight end before he ended up hurting his knee. Cam Scatterbo was a sharp pick. And, maybe I wasn't sharp for not being in on Cam Scatterbo, but like you look at what he did, that was a great pick you could have made. So I feel like that is kind of the silver lining here is that when you have these guys that are difference-making players and they go down with an injury, you can at least kind of tell yourself, hey, the process was right. And maybe I didn't get this for a whole 17 weeks, but I got Tucker Kraft while he was performing like the tight end one. I got Cam Scatterbo and he was giving me 30 points per week. And then you hope that because that tells you that you're an above average fantasy player, that you can fill those losses elsewhere. But Drake London, that's a tough one. Like, I don't think there is a one-to-one replacement for Drake London. You're not finding a Drake London on waivers. This is just a tough blow. Hopefully we can come back. But then even when he does come back, if he does come back, we got to remember what this Kirk Cousins offense looks like, man. Like, it just kind of dawned on me today. We've kind of jokingly said, like, Miami Dolphins, like, worst run defense in the NFL, but they shut down Bijan Robinson. And then it clicked. They didn't shut down Bijan Robinson. They shut down the Kirk Cousins-led Atlanta Falcons. And if that's what we're looking at for the remainder of the season is Kirk Cousins out here being the starting quarterback, I'm worried about Bijan Robinson. I'm worried about Tyler Algier. I'm worried about Kyle Pitts. I mean, I'm worried about every single Falcons player if we're going to be looking at Kirk Cousins closing out the season.
Except for David Stills, who's best friends with Kirk Cousins as the two old dads in the locker room. And David Stills is going to go out there and be wide receiver 12 for the fantasy playoffs. I like your
joke, but we do see this stuff at the end of the season all the time where these guys come up out of nowhere. Like Olamide Zaccheaus was the wide receiver 17 during the fantasy playoffs last year. Like we see this every year where these guys just pop up out of nowhere. Like I remember when Devontae Parker had that random season in Miami where you just picked him up off of waivers, plugged him in, and you just got wide receiver 1 production for like the 6 straight weeks to close out the year.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I start the roundup every single week, I don't really know my theme. I guess is probably the way. Yeah. And like once I've worked through everything, like my theme is obvious for the week. And really by the time I worked through this week, it was just these players coming out of nowhere and providing production. And to go back to your point on Rashee Rice and the great research that Dan Hendry did, yes, sharp players drafted him potentially, but at the same time, I think what we see quite a bit is if you have an early season injury or maybe you missed on some spots in your draft, I think those people tend to be a lot more aggressive in working the waiver wire and a lot more, they're looking for solutions. They're a lot more proactive. They're taking a lot more shots. They have the availability to take more shots because they have this smoldering hole in their roster now, as opposed to, I think it's human nature that you'll get people that they nailed their draft and they're 10-1, but meanwhile, they think their starters are locked in every single week. I'm going to save that fab for the exact right guy. And I'm not going to make the bids on these guys because they're not the exact right guy. I'm already set. And then all of a sudden you run into a week where you lose 3 starters. You didn't insulate yourself with the depth because of, arrogance, because of whatever reason it might have been. And all of a sudden you're lost. And we see, it seems like I see it all the time where 1 seeds will lose after their bye, they'll lose their first game to some scrappy 6 seed.
Especially last year.
Yeah. Some scrappy 6 seed that barely got into the playoffs. But what that 6 seed did is they grounded that entire season. And now all of a sudden they have these guys that they can plug in off these options.
Absolutely. Yeah. We see that every single year. And anyone watching this show, you're catching us at a weird time too. We're recording on Monday night. So like you're catching Jeff and I while we're in like the midst of our writing as we're still kind of like getting a clear picture from the rest of the week. Usually you get us on Tuesday night when we finish our writing and we're very reflective and ready to move forward, where you are getting us when we're still kind of processing what happened throughout this week. And Jeff, you said how I do the same thing. Like I do all of my risers and fallers. I write about like 50 to 60 players. And then what I do is I go for a walk around my neighborhood for like an hour. And that's where I kind of come up with like the theme for my article and how I'm going to tie it all together, because you do get these kind of big picture themes. And that's what we were talking about this afternoon, is like the theme of this week was injuries. So let's try to put like a dynasty spin on this right now. We aren't doctors. We don't know what's going to happen, but like if you are a contender right now, Drake London isn't a guy that I want to move off of, but Drake London was also a guy that was going to help you win a championship. And if he is theoretically out for the next 6 weeks, what do you do here? Like, this is a young player who is performing at a high level. He's at 100 plus yards in 5 of his last 6 games. Like he felt like a guy who is going to be a league winning receiver this year. But if you're contending, you don't want to move off of a young player like this either. So what are you doing in this situation, Jeff?
He goes into my IR and I forget about him on my team. And then I look for a player like Stephon Diggs Wilson. Or Michael Wilson. I really do you kind of, I like to try to map it out, and it's especially depends if there's a trade deadline or not, but I kind of like to have, I think just in general in Dynasty, the way I like to build my rosters, but really kind of in general anyways, is to have like +1, I guess, a concept of +1 where like, I feel like I've got 10 locked in starters +1, and like, I'll kind of try to drive my teams to that. And so
Aaron Jones, Stephon Diggs sitting on the bench, just like waiting to get called up.
Yep. And I think that's where I don't like to be a lot deeper than that, because I mean, if I run into a year where maybe I'm built around Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, and CeeDee Lamb, and the 4 of them are hurt, like it's kind of the old, Jim Sorgi didn't get any snaps in practice because if Peyton Manning went down, the Colts knew where they were screwed anyway. So why were we going to waste any snaps on Jim Sorgi? At some level, it's like you want to scrap out there and put something out there that you can. But I think that a dangerous way to play Dynasty would be like every time you lose a Drake London to go and chase and try to fill that spot. Whereas just looking at trying to map out if there's no trade deadlines, then great. Like you can go out and if you win the first round or two and you need to get a boost right there, then go ahead and do it. But I think that to try to say, hey, I was a contender. I believe my team is a contender, and now I just lost Drake London, Malik Neighbors, and Josh Jacobs. I'm still going to believe that I'm a contender. What do I have to go out there and trade to go by? Like sometimes you just have to put your best foot forward and not chase losses.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I mean, like if you're able to tier down and maybe get like Emeka Ibuka or a Roma Dunze, like another young player who is healthy right now that probably isn't.
If you always want to trade these guys when they're hurt, like don't trade the guy when they're hurt.
I mean, you shouldn't, but also like if this is like, this is a big hole, like this is 25 points per game that a lot of people are losing right here. And if you've got a winning record and you don't have the reserves, if you didn't set yourself up to have something like this, like, do you think it's that crazy if you're first place in your division right now, first place in your league, you've got Drake London? You don't think if you can get like Roma Dunze in a second, that's not something you would do?
I mean, you've played Dynasty with me. Have you seen me make trades like that?
You have not. No, you are not that type of player. Sometimes these are rhetorical questions for the sake of content, Jeff Bell.
I completely understand that. And that's where I'm saying, like, if you are I would say if you're a contender and losing Drake London makes you not a contender, then you weren't a contender to begin with. So the idea that you're going to deal for somebody that makes you a contender, because what happens when you lose the next guy? Because you'll lose another guy. And so it just becomes a house of cards at some point. That's where +1 plus having a couple of guys that are kind of rising off, like just kind of having options is just the biggest thing there. And you don't need to trade all your draft picks to have options. You don't need to trade Drake London away to have options, but look for some of these, again, like Stephon Diggs or somebody like that you should always at this time of year probably be scouring those teams that are at the end of your league. And more often than not, you try to have the conversation with them and they say, well, Stephon Diggs is wide receiver 15 right now. And so I need a first round pick for Stephon Diggs. And you say, well, you're living in La La Land because nobody in this league is going to trade a first round pick for Stephon Diggs. But here is 3 random young guys that will have value potentially in the future, whereas the guy that you're holding right now might not.
Here's Keon Coleman and Amari DeMercado and a 3rd round pick. Well, you take that for Stephon Diggs, and then sometimes
nobody else is giving you a 2nd round pick.
So another injury I want to talk about, Jeff, and you talk about kind of like setting yourself up for success late in the season. How many times have we talked about Emanuel Wilson? Not just throughout the season, but like in the preseason, like during the spring when we were doing our like team breakdowns in May, we were talking about this guy as like somebody that should just be picked up and rostered in all your dynasty leagues. And it's funny when I go through and I look at all the dynasty leagues that you and I are in together, he's rostered in every league by either me or by you, because like we practice what we preach here. And it's not that you're ever like hoping for injuries by any means, but it's an inevitable part of the game. And Josh Jacobs, has been a workout horse, an Iron Man, whatever you want to call it. Like he doesn't get injured frequently. But now he goes down with this, what they're calling most likely a PCL sprain. The team hasn't officially come out and said it yet, but that's what a lot of the Twitter doctors are speculating. They said that he said he feels good, and the team said that the x-rays came back negative. They also said that there's no structural damage, but that his week 12 availability is going to be in jeopardy, which honestly sounds really similar to what we were hearing about Brock Bowers when he first got hurt, and Ricky Pearsall when he got first hurt. And this is the same thing now that Drake London and Josh Jacobs are both dealing with. So Emanuel Wilson, if he's available right now in any dynasty leagues you're in, I mean, this is a guy that you're just emptying the clip for, right, Jeff? Like, even if it's just for 2 or 3 weeks, like Emanuel Wilson should get close to a workhorse role in this offense. This is a guy that I'm dumping all my fab on to get if he's still available.
Yeah, I think Chris Brooks potentially is still involved in the passing game. That's still an option.
For what it's worth, Chris Brooks had 1 touch in this game to Emanuel Wilson.
Was it a target?
12. It wasn't. It was a carry, and Emanuel Wilson actually got the targets and the touchdown. So all of the goal line work and all of the passing down work went to Emanuel Wilson in this one.
Yeah. Okay. I believe. I mean, yeah, I know. I watched.
But also,
I understand.
also, what I'll say is that we do see this change often, where like a mid-game injury, you're kind of in panic. Like, there's so many other things going around. It's just like, okay, Emmanuel, get in there. You're playing Josh Jacobs' role today. And then with a week to reset, we know it is in Matt LaFleur's DNA to like want to have a split committee. And he really kind of bucked that trend over the last couple of years with Josh Jacobs. But I think without a player of Josh Jacobs' caliber, I don't think Emmanuel Wilson's going to run away with a workload, but he has been the preferred back. I think we probably see like a 70-30 split in Wilson's favor.
Yeah, at this point of the year, you have to grab these guys that can lead the backfield in touches because, and especially hypothetically, a good offense, been struggling lately, but hypothetically, the Packers are a good offense. You have to grab these guys. Again, you just have to. You have to, I think in Dynasty especially, they can have the mindset of, you kind of do your own rookie evals sometimes. You kind of decide on players and can decide that this guy is not particularly good. I don't really know that you just have to grab opportunity at the running back position, especially, but just, yeah, I mean, Emanuel Wilson should have been added already. You should have watched the show and listened to us and added him in your leagues. But I do think that this is a situation. We saw an Island game a couple weeks ago where Emanuel Wilson looked pretty strong. I think this isn't September when everybody was convinced that Marshawn Lloyd was still going to be the backup. I think we have a full season of data that we're not exactly breaking ground here to say Emanuel Wilson's Josh Jacobs' backup. But
like we were a few weeks ago when we were saying this guy's available in 99% of leagues. Yeah. Like, what is going on here? And I think that
preseason even too, when it seemed like they're just exasperated with Marshawn Lloyd, finally just ready to move on and give up. And so I think it's yes, grab Emanuel Wilson, he's available, but also these things should be illustrative because you should be looking at your league and seeing like, we'll get to it, but if LaQuint Allen's available, like LaQuint Allen should be added, or if
Devin Singletary,
Chris Brooks should be added now. If Emanuel Wilson's already added and your league's deep enough, then you should add Chris Brooks because one injury away. I mean, Dallas, like Malik Davis, we'll see tonight if he's really actually the backup running back or not, but that's a guy that's probably available in a ton of leagues that's way off the radar. That could be that one guy that's an injury away from stepping in. Just always with these running backs, especially one-off weeks, you got to play these guys. You got to have these guys so you can play these guys if the situation arises.
Right. And this is how you and I play Dynasty. Like, we talk about it all the time. And it's a little bit tougher in redraft because there's typically like shorter benches. So you kind of have to pick and choose. Like, I'm going to go for the Tank Bigsby's. I'm going to go for the Emanuel Wilsons, the really high end. And you see those other guys floating out there. But like when you're playing Dynasty, a lot of these leagues have such deep benches that you're still stashing the Taj Brooks, even though he hasn't shown any sign of life this year, or the Keaton Mitchell, who like might look like the RB3 right now because Justice Hill is getting the passing down work. But if Derrick Henry goes down, Keaton Mitchell is going to be able to blow up for like huge opportunities there. Or there's these guys that like you said, just an injury away. You don't want to be fighting for them on the waiver wire when the opportunity arises. You want to set yourself up for that before it happens. And I think LaQuint Allen, who you mentioned, is perfect for the next guy we want to talk about. I mean, we don't know exactly what's going on with Deshaun Watson. What we do know is that for 3 quarters, Deshaun Watson fantasy managers thought they had a league winner. Like it looked like the flipping happened. Like he was out touching Travis Etienne 15-12. Then he goes down with an ankle injury. Etienne comes in after the ankle injury, punches in 2 touchdowns, has himself a huge fantasy day. And Deshaun Watson was really quick to play it off. He said, like, no big deal. My ankle's fine. But he was quickly declared out, didn't come back in the game. And if you look at it, it was a pretty nasty looking injury too. Like he got rolled up underneath an offensive lineman, his ankle just completely twisted in the wrong way. And we see that often too with players, right? Like they'll finish the game, they'll give their post-game press conference, say that they're fine, and then Wednesday comes around and they can't practice and their ankle's all wrapped up with tape. I mean, these things tighten up the next day. So for the sake of conversation, we're going to assume that Deshaun Watson is probably going to miss some time. We'll get a clearer picture as this week goes on. But would you expect LaQuint Allen to just like come in immediately and like have any sort of flex value alongside Travis Etienne if Tutin's out? Because we saw Tutin was handling 30-40% of the carries even before this takeover in week 11.
I thought this Jacksonville, the 2 rookies here are just the weirdest scenario in fantasy all year long because Tootin and Allen were playing almost the exact same amount of snaps every single week.
Mm-hmm.
And Allen just wasn't touching the ball. He was in for as a pass blocker, getting pass reps. And then Tootin would come in as like the early down relief. And then Travis Etienne was kind of just a mix around. And so it's always kind of struck me as like Allen should be added in every single league. He shouldn't be sitting out there. They obviously like him. They're obviously putting him in high leverage situation, passing situations. So if Tootin were to go down or ETN were to go down, I think the idea, like if you were to just looking at fantasy points, not digging into the actual usage or just looking at touches, those types of things, and not digging into the actual usage of what's happening here, then, you know, the assumption would be that Tootin's going to take over the entire backfield, or that, and he probably would get a lot of carries, would probably definitely be the guy that could be getting 20 carries for sure. But Allen would be involved. And I think that with Tootin going out, I think Allen will be involved as well. I'm not sure I'm there yet on flex consideration because he's been playing snaps and not allowed to touch the ball. So it's one of those that you would think it would start to break in his direction of getting 3 or 4 targets a week if they really felt like they should be giving him 3 or 4 targets a week, and they don't feel like that. But I think it's an interesting conversation, just because the other thing that popped into my head too, that as we're talking about waivers, don't be afraid to grab the other guy. Don't be afraid to grab, like, look at Arizona where Michael Carter comes out that first game when Trey Benson was hurt. Michael Carter gets all the touches, and then over the course of Trey Benson being out, it's been Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight has been the more valuable fantasy piece. Because I think that's the other thing that we get wrong quite a bit in fantasy is when there's some ambiguity around who the backup is. Like Tootin, there's no ambiguity there. If Travis Etienne were to go down, Tootin would be getting plenty of carries. But there's some of these backfields, the coaches don't even know who's going to be the running back before they go out and give a guy an opportunity. And these positions
sometimes they might not know until like Friday practice. They might spend Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday just looking at these guys in practice to see who they really want out there on Sunday. Like we act like we know all the answers, but yeah, you're spot on there. And I think the way to do this in fantasy leagues, dynasty leagues, what I do all the time is, rather than like, you know, setting it up where I could pick up this player and then drop this player, I'll just drop a player from my roster beforehand. And then I'll put in that big, you know, let's say out of $1,000, let's say I put $485 on Emanuel Wilson. And then I'll follow that up with like a $25 on Chris Brooks, or I'll put in like, you know, that big fab, like, let's say hypothetically Tootin was available, you know, you put in like that big fab bid on Tootin, and then you follow that up with like a little bid. So just so even if you miss out on that one guy, you're still getting another like contingent option there.
Exactly. I think that's exactly the way to play it. I think one of the biggest shifts that you'll see is coming out of week 1 primarily, but week 2 as well, because coaches don't know what they have with running backs until they're in game situations. They don't hit in practice. Everything is about preservation throughout the week. And so until the bullets are live, and that even plays for most of the preseason, for most of everything leading into the regular season, you'll get these backfields where we talked about it very early in the season. I think it was last year even, that Jameson Williams had like half the touches in the Saints backfield week 1. And they said, oh, this doesn't work anymore. And Jameson Williams was off the roster before he was ever used again. And some of these backup situations, they'll plug one guy in there and they will say, it wasn't what we thought it was going to be. The actual answer is going to be this guy instead.
Brings me to the next one that we want to talk about. This is just flowing nicely, going from one to the other. Jaylen Warren left last week's game with an injury. And then this is another kind of weird one where like Kenneth Gainwell was getting touches early in the game. Like he had a first quarter receiving touchdown. Jaylen Warren got hurt later in the game. And then we saw the second touchdown come from Kenneth Gainwell as well. But he was involved early in the game. Jaylen Warren exits with an injury. And then we see Caleb Johnson come in and get the most touches that Caleb Johnson has had in quite a while. So I don't want to say that like I'm all in on Caleb Johnson now, but this is a guy who's dropped in a lot of dynasty formats. And Kenneth Gainwell, we know that he can shoulder the load if necessary. We saw that game in London early in the season when he punched in 3 touchdowns. We saw last week 7 for 8 receiving, almost 100 yards receiving, and a couple of touchdowns. He is a very good receiver. But I do think that like if you're just comparing what Kenneth Gainwell can do on early downs on the ground compared to what Caleb Johnson can do on early downs on the ground, we might see Caleb Johnson getting some usage over these next couple of weeks if Jaylen Warren can't suit up.
And who was playing quarterback when Caleb Johnson was getting carries at the end of the game?
Mason Rudolph, right? Yeah, they've got some second team connections. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, not exactly. So I've been advocating Caleb Johnson as a guy to go out and buy for cheap in Dynasty all year long, because what my assumption is happened is they drafted Caleb Johnson with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback, with not having Aaron Rodgers as the quarterback, basically. And then I assume that they got into practice and started to see some live bullets, and Aaron Rodgers said, I'm not playing with this dude. I don't need the power run game element. I need a guy that is not going to get me annihilated from the guy that's coming off the backside. And so that's when Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell established themselves.
Superb pass blockers for anybody who's not like two of the best pass blocking running backs in the league, and that's probably why they're getting these opportunities. So I'm glad you went there, Jeff, because my mind hadn't even made that connection yet.
Yeah. So they draft Caleb Johnson thinking that they're going to build a team around the power run game. They had just lost Najee Harris. We've got Caleb Johnson here. We want to be physical, Steelers football, run the ball down your throat. And then they get Aaron Rodgers. And all of a sudden they go from being a physical power run offense, run the ball down your throat, to now we're a short passing offense. Now we are going to throw the ball more than we're going to run the ball. We're going to get our players the ball in space, let them create. We're going to need running backs that can pick up the blitz so that Rodgers has that extra moment to get the ball out of his hands. And Caleb Johnson is not relevant in that type of a situation. But you switch it to Mason Rudolph, and what are you going to do with Mason Rudolph? You're going to go back to Steelers football, and just like you planned back in the draft, you're going to run the ball down your opponent's throat. You're going to give the ball to Caleb Johnson and say, all right, rookie, let's go out here, see what we can do. And I think it's not entirely shocking that you get one movement with the other movement, because that probably was the plan back when that draft pick was made.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there. And like I said, that was a connection I hadn't made yet, but that would check out. I mean, like Caleb Johnson, they're going to ask him to pass block. They're just going to run the ball on this wide zone scheme that we know that he can find success in. And that's what Mason Rudolph has had a lot of success in. Well, I wouldn't say success, but it's what we've seen Mason Rudolph comfortable in the NFL, what we've seen him playing under Mike Tomlin. And that brings me to the next guy I want to talk about too, Aaron Rodgers. They're saying a fractured left wrist, but they're saying a slight fracture or a small fracture. I can't remember the exact terminology that they use, but Aaron himself, Rodgers, he said that he feels like he's about 50-50 as to whether he can play next week or not. They said he might have some issues gripping the ball with this broken wrist. So, of course, ball security can be an issue out there as well. But let's just say theoretically, for the sake of discussion, Aaron Rodgers can't play this week, Jeff. How does that change the outlook for the rest of the guys there? We talked about the backfield a little bit, but how about these tight ends? How about DK Metcalf? Do you think this is a positive or negative for the pass catchers in Pittsburgh?
Sorry, I'm trying to see who the Steelers play next week. I missed it. You know who they play next week, Dave?
Yes, they play the Bears.
You should know who they play next week. They play the Bears. I think when you're looking at
Monday evening, I turn that page Wednesday. That's when I turn the page to next week. Yep.
When we didn't record 2 weeks, it's really like doing the Tuesday night show with you. Of like, I feel like the 2 hours that we spent talking is like flipping the page from one week and moving to the next page.
Like putting a bow on the previous week and moving on after Tuesday night recording. Yep.
Because 2 weeks ago when we didn't record on Tuesday, I was so lost. Like that entire week, I was like, "You tell me what day of the week it is?" And it was like we got into like doing the DFS show, and it was like, "Oh, that's right. Like you got to know what's going on this week." No, it's my expectation. My thought would be you're going to try to run the ball with Caleb Johnson. You're going to have the extra tight ends as blockers, not as short pass outlets, and you're going to try to connect downfield with DK Metcalf. And you're going to lean into DK Metcalf's our playmaker here. We're going to build around a physical power run game and DK Metcalf working off that physical power run game downfield and allow DK Metcalf to do some DK Metcalf things. Because we saw Mason Rudolph last year with Tennessee make Calvin Ridley very, very relevant. And Mason Rudolph was quarterback, I think it was quarterback 15, quarterback 14 during the fantasy playoffs last year, because Tennessee was playing YOLO ball and just letting loose, let Mason Rudolph throw it with Ridley, with having Tajay Spears out of the backfield. And so I think you're going to see that. You're going to see Gainwell out of the backfield. You're going to see these tight ends probably blocking more than being receiving outlets. You're going to see attacking downfield with Metcalf, and Roman Wilson looks to be the wide receiver 2 now in the Steelers offense over Calvin Austin.
Yeah, he is clearly taking over that role. And I do want to see, like, I wonder too, because you talk about this, Caleb Johnson, bringing him or taking him off the field for Warren and Gainwell, who are better pass blockers. I wonder how much that also has to play into the 13 and the 04 personnel, like the weird stuff that we've been seeing with the formations here. Do you think having 3 tight ends out there is just like more added protection for Aaron Rodgers? I wonder if maybe we do see, some 3 wide receiver sets where DK Metcalf, Roman Wilson, and Calvin Austin are all out there together, which is something we haven't seen like at all in the Aaron Rodgers era. So should be some big changes here, going from, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, who is in his 40s and immobile and maybe some waning arm strength right now, to Mason Rudolph, who is just a very different type of player. Another injury I want to talk about, Jeff, and this one happened in the same game, Dillon Gabriel, concussion.
That was the same game.
It was not? No, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that was the Ravens.
They played the Ravens. It was AFC North day.
AFC North, yes, that's right. I got the AFC North opponents flip-flop there, but yes.
The wrong
Dillon Gabriel.
Orange Ohio.
Yes, the wrong Orange Ohio team. Dillon Gabriel left with a concussion, and we have seen occasionally people can make it through concussion protocol in 1 week and be ready for the week after, but our Adam Hutchison, who does very good injury analysis work, says that it's about 80% likely that guys miss the following week after entering concussion protocol. So for the sake of discussion, we're going to say that Dillon Gabriel is not playing next week, and it is going to be a Shedeur Sanders start. Jeff, I don't know if you got a chance to watch much of this game yet, but Shedeur Sanders was just absolutely atrocious, completing like 25% of his passes, threw an interception, took a couple of sacks. I mean, I know this is what the fans want, but he was a 5th round pick for a reason. He just is not ready for the NFL.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, Cleveland's got one mission right now, and it's none of these guys are going to be their quarterback next year. It's get that quarterback next year. They've got the extra draft pick from Jacksonville. I don't know that. I think these guys are legitimately hurt, but I think that most across the league are at least legitimately, though there's injured and there's hurt, and these guys are legitimately injured. I think a lot around the league are legitimately hurt right now, and we always talk about it in terms of buys, in terms of like giving that extra week off for the buy. I mean, it works both ways. Like there can be some situations where, a guy, I still believe that earlier in the season when Michael Penix missed the game, that some of it was, he's struggling with this thing. We want to give him some time. Some of it was the trade deadline's coming up. Let's see if Kirk Cousins can't go out here and put on a show before the trade deadline. I think there's, at this point of the year, especially some of these teams, a Cleveland team that knows what it's playing for and it's not playing for much, there's not really any reason to put Dillon Gabriel on the football field if there's anything close on concussion symptoms. Some of it is to find the answer of what does it look like when we turn the lights on here with Shedeur Sanders. Some of it's to say there's no reason why Gabriel needs to be in this situation. And I think that's, we talked about it at the beginning of the show, but that's the reality of the portion of the season that we're entering. It's so often look at the season, kind of break it down in windows like quarters, or kind of just make whatever situation you want there. But we're in the backside here where these teams that are out of it know that they're out of it. These teams that are in the playoff might be looking at some situations for, let's take a breath on this guy. He's really toughing it out the last couple of weeks. Maybe we give him 1 week here and things will rebound and he'll be that much better. So I think it's just keeping an eye out for those types of things. But in terms of Shedeur Sanders, I mean, it's a struggle. I don't know. He's a young player. He's not put in a good situation. He's out there with receivers that, I mean, you can put a lot of players out there with those receivers and might not be doing great things. Outside of Jameis Winston, we know Jameis Winston would be doing great things. I think the whole narrative around Shedeur just is frustrating, annoying. Like people just need to take a break. Like, I don't know. It doesn't need to be like
we have to talk about it. Dillon Gabriel got hurt and he played his first NFL action this week. We got to talk about it.
Everything doesn't need to be a referendum. Like everything doesn't need it doesn't have to be like all the things that it's supposed to be. It's, there's analysis and then there's over analysis, and more often than not, over analysis is going to hurt yourself. But I think Shedeur Sanders, like we've had questions about him as a prospect, about his physical gifts. What was the thing that made him a high-end quarterback? He's not particularly athletic. He doesn't particularly have a big arm. And yeah, there's off the field package. That's another conversation entirely. But when you add it all up, it makes for a risky profile in a prospect, to say the least. Plus, knowing that you were to draft him makes everybody descend upon you for it, and it ultimately is not a fair situation for Shedeur Sanders to be in.
Let me ask you a crazy question here, Jeff, and you can tell me. Sometimes I just throw these thoughts out there and they're wild, and you hit to reel me in. You talk about these guys, like the production coming late in the year from the most unexpected people. Deshaun Watson is still available in 59% of leagues. Do you think that maybe we see Deshaun Watson at the end of this season? Not designated return this week. They said they're going to be without him in week 12, but the reports are that he is nearing his return and that he hopes to return this season. I mean, they know what they've got in Dillon Gabriel. They don't know what they have in Shedeur Sanders yet, but I think they'll probably find out within the next few weeks. I mean, the fact that Deshaun Watson's sitting out there right now in almost 60% of dynasty leagues is kind of crazy to me. Like, I don't think that he's like a must add by any means, but especially in super flex leagues, like, why wouldn't you pick up this guy just to see if he ends up getting some starts throughout the fantasy playoffs?
I mean, the reason why he's available in that many leagues is because it is a moral conversation for a lot of people.
Sure.
Like it's. And it's easy. It's very easy when a guy isn't playing very well to make a moral stance on that. It becomes a lot harder if Deshaun Watson is quarterback 3 to make a moral stance on that. So
a lot of people dropping Deshaun Watson for their morals while holding on to their Tyreek Hills and Kareem Hunts.
Yep. Joe Mixon still rostered across the league. Yeah. But
exactly.
Yeah, it's you pull that thread and everything comes unraveled really, really quick. But if you are Cleveland and you're looking at this, we've got nothing to lose. Maybe we plug Watson in for 3 games. He plays lights out, looks like Deshaun Watson again, and somebody will give us a 7th round pick for him and we can move on with it instead of, I tend to believe that Deshaun Watson has probably played his last down as a Brown, but if they're talking about reactivating him, then he's going to play again. It's just because there's nothing to lose.
They're not going to bring him back to practice to be the emergency quarterback, right? Like if they're bringing him back, they're hoping that they can mitigate some loss here, and like you said, get a day 3 pick in return. So I think
there's that, or there's
picking up is what I'm saying.
The people that made that decision have a lot of pride, and a lot of money's been invested. So you'd probably just take that one extra time just to be sure before a lot of money is going to be flushed down the drain, that just to make sure that there's nothing there. That's probably where just due diligence, just to make sure that one last final look.
Yeah, maybe after twice tearing his Achilles, maybe that's just what he needed to get back on track. All right, let's
you lose something and you're either going to rebound and work hard and recognize the thing that is lost and recognize that your opportunities to have that thing are few and far between now, or you've already said, you know what, my money's in the bank.
Yeah. And sometimes I wonder if that's where he is, but again, I'm not going to try to get inside the mind of an NFL player. We'll see it just from a dynasty standpoint. I'll throw some bids down on Deshaun Watson just to see how this Browns quarterback situation shakes out over the rest of this season. A couple more impactful injuries though, Jeff. Like, it just doesn't stop this week. Calvin Ridley had missed the last 4 games, comes back. First snap of the game, breaks his fibula, carted off the field, and he is now out for the season. So I don't even know how we talk about this actionably, like from a fantasy football standpoint. We assume, or from a dynasty football standpoint, we assume that he's going to be back next year. But at that point, 32 years old, we don't know what team he's going to be playing for, coming off of a very, very down year. We have seen wide receivers, into their early and mid 30s still performing, but I don't know. I don't know if we're going to see that from Calvin Ridley. Like, this is a guy where when you really look at it, like, one big year 5 seasons ago, and since then it's been suspensions and injuries, and we can make up all of these excuses. But if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, at a certain point, we could just got to look at Calvin Ridley, what he's done since that big year 2 in Atlanta, and it just hasn't been good.
I will push back a little bit because he was good last year. Once that DeAndre Hopkins was traded, and then there was the DeAndre Hopkins game, and then there was the weird game where he had a 0 and Brian Callahan made some comments afterwards of basically like, oh, I screwed up. He got a 0. He was really good the rest of the season. And I was trying to filibuster because I wanted to have an actual number on it. My internet's not working the best right now to give me an actual number at where he was after DeAndre Hopkins was traded. But I do remember over the second half
he had
of
that
the year,
143-yard game in week 8. And from there onward, I mean, he turned it on a little bit, 75 yards per game. So, I mean, he was pacing for, I mean, you look over the course of a season, like pacing for nearly 1,300 yards over the second half of last year.
Right. Yeah. After week 8, he was wide receiver 16 on the season. So, yeah, I mean, it's not wide receiver 5 like he was at one period of time, but it wasn't horrible there. But I think where to go, how to unpack this, what to look for in Dynasty fantasy football with this Calvin Ridley injury. I mean, you're looking to see Alec Emanuel and Jameer DK, where you probably were prior to this injury. And to me,
Jameer DK only ran 6 routes this week. I don't know if you noticed that.
He got a concussion.
Did he? All right. I figured there was something I missed there. Okay.
Yeah, I think he had a concussion. I think he got knocked out of the game. He's leading the league in kick return yards by like 250 yards over the next guy. Like he's just blown it away. Like, he's going to be all pro kick returner probably. But I think when I look at Emanuel DK, my expectations here is I don't think I've seen anything from them to suggest that the Titans should not be investing heavily in wide receivers around Cam Ward. And I do think that we get these situations sometimes where you get this day 3 wide receiver and it's just, there's nothing else here. And I remember Quintez Cephas a couple of years ago, there was a whole thing in Dynasty about how the Lions literally had nobody under contract except for Quintez Cephas. And he became just this thing in Dynasty football. And then I don't know that he played a meaningful down that season for the...
He also had that one-handed catch in training camp that like really got people excited. Yeah.
But you just get these situations where these guys are, I don't think Emanuel, I know there's a massive hype for Emanuel and people love him and that's fine. I don't know. More often than not, instead of these guys playing themselves into a situation where they're the starter, they play themselves out of a situation where they're the potential starter, where the team has seen enough and they say, oh, we really actually have to go get some NFL wide receivers here for Cam Ward. And, you can be 4th on the depth chart, 3rd on the depth chart, but I think that the Titans would be remiss if they are not looking actively, heavily at how do they add receiving talent around Cam Ward. And as a dynasty situation, if you've got these rookies and watch them to really see if you think that Emanuel is a true difference maker at the NFL level, or if you see a guy that might fall into some production at the end of a lost year and sell for that opportunity. Because I think we're already probably at the point now where you can get more for Emanuel than if you drafted him after the NFL draft. You could probably get more than what you actually paid for him. Or DK was absolutely free. You could probably get a lot more for DK than what you actually paid for him in your leagues. And more often than not, over time, I think cashing those guys in ends up being the right bet, the right place to be on those prospects, because the team does say we need real, legitimate NFL starting wide receiver talent.
And it kind of reminds me, Travis Fulgham, where he was just like producing because he was the only man standing on that Eagles team. And then what did they do the next year? They went out and they got Devonta Smith. What did they do the next year? They went out and they made a huge blockbuster trade for AJ Brown. And that was like Travis Fulgham was getting those, as you like to call them, struggle targets. Like the ball had to go somewhere and he was kind of the only man standing there. But they quickly realized like we cannot build a passing attack around Travis Fulgham. And they spent the next 2 years investing heavily at that position.
Look at what Michael Wilson did this week, going out there, catching 15 balls for 185 yards. I think Michael Wilson's a good player. I don't think anybody's saying that we need to build our passing attack around Michael Wilson. And that's really, if you're looking at building your team, and especially if you're looking at, we have Cam Ward, we really need to support him. It's like, look at what the Bears did. They go out and they get DJ Moore, and DJ Moore's a very good receiver, but then they also went out and got Rome Odunze too on top of it. And they said, we're going to keep adding late. And then they went out and got Luther Burden and went out and got Colston Loveland. I mean, that's what teams that are not the Buffalo Bills are doing with their wide receiver rooms of continuing to add top end talent, because their league is full of, like, I love Michael Wilson. I was very early on Michael Wilson. I like him quite a bit, but the league is full of Michael Wilsons that are not demanding targets on a week-to-week basis, that you give them a one-off opportunity and they are good NFL players that they can put up weeks like that. But week to week, when the defense is planning around them, the defense is always going to plan differently for Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase than Michael Wilson. And if you do not have those guys on your team, it's always going to be harder offensively.
Last guy I want to talk about here, Jeff, is Sam LaPorta. And this one kind of came out of nowhere. Like, he didn't exit week 10 with an injury or anything like that. Just opened up the week at DNP and then another DNP on Thursday. And then we even got, I'm sure you saw, like, internally, somebody was like, hey, Dave, like, why don't you have Sam LaPorta in your rankings this week? And I said, I don't know, I'm getting kind of weird vibes. Like, he hasn't practiced this week. And then, like, later that afternoon, Sam LaPorta placed on IR. Kind of surprised a lot of people. But what they're saying is that he's going to take these 4 weeks to rest up, and then they expect him to come back after those next 4 weeks. So doing some quick math here, he's going to miss weeks 11, 12, 13, 14, should be back weeks 15, 16, and 17 for the fantasy playoffs. So I don't even think there's anything actionable to talk about here. Like, Brock Wright is not going to step in and do what Sam LaPorta does. I think what we're going to see is just more of a concentration of targets to Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams. I don't think that there's going to be a tight end really stepping up in his place. But I think the interesting thing is that now, those players I talked about, Jameson Williams specifically, we're seeing a bigger role. And we saw it yesterday. This is now the second game in a row that Dan Campbell has called. And we saw an effort to get the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown. It just didn't really work out. But once again, we see Jameson Williams getting these crossing routes across the middle of the field where he can make big plays. He can score touchdowns. He can create after the catch. Of course, like, anytime we talk about the Lions, I just, kind of shoehorn a Jameson Williams conversation into here. But that's my takeaway, is that, like, with no Sam LaPorta for the next 4 weeks or the foreseeable future, Jameson Williams, I'm looking at him as just a plug and play top 20 wide receiver.
It's top of mind because I went to the Buckeyes game on Saturday night, and, like, the Buckeyes, if you follow college football, everybody's supposedly hurt for the Buckeyes, but at the same time, they have Ryan Day as an NFL coach, basically. He's spent his entire career in the NFL. Matt Patricia is the defense coordinator now. They really have an NFL mindset around this team, and they kind of don't have a lot that they're playing for right now relative to, they know exactly what the gauntlet looks like coming up. And, like, Carnell Tate is going to be a top 5 wide receiver in the draft coming up. And Carnell Tate's not played the last couple of weeks, and there's been, like, the reporting is around college injuries is way different than the NFL, but nobody's quite sure what's going on with that. And, like, there's a lot of conversation right now of, like, basically these, like, load management, more or less. And I don't know that Sam LaPorta is a case of load management, especially not going on IR, but it might be a case of,
but I think
if it were
get as healthy as possible because we need you for the playoffs.
Exactly.
Is kind of what I'm taking away here. Yeah,
exactly. And if it were playoffs, maybe he'd have played last week. And right. Since it's not, maybe it's like, hey, if we shut this thing down for a month, we'll be good to go for the playoffs because we recognize what's coming up, what's ahead of us. It's like the Sean McVay when he doesn't play any starters against in week 18, even though it could have affected his draft standing. And then he goes out and just blows the doors off a Minnesota team that was fighting for their division in a bye the week before, because a week makes such a difference for these guys, or a month is a huge difference potentially. And then I think on the point, I think you're exactly right about Jameson Williams, about involving him. I think that was the natural progression with Dan Campbell taking over, recognizing there's been a lot of talk about Jameson Williams, basically that speed. John Morton was using that as vertical 9-route speed, and I pointed out on Sunday, like, no, you want to use that as crosser speed. Jameson Williams is a lot better going horizontally, getting the ball in his hands, allowing him to turn upfield, allowing him to create. Meanwhile, the entire defense is already in a trail position because he's that fast. It's not just waste him on running routes down the field. I do think that Brock Wright is not nothing, though, because he played almost every single snap this week. Ross Dwelly played 1 snap, and he was the only other tight end to play. But where it really affects is the red zone. I think that's where it really comes in for LaPorta, and that's one of the areas that Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown are not exactly what you think about when it comes to red zone wide receivers. And I think that was Sam LaPorta's key area. And I think, we've seen him in the past be utilized in the red zone. So that's where tight end in general is just decimated in fantasy this week. pulled the numbers this week looking at this, and Darnell Washington was tight end 6 this week heading into a Monday night game that has 2 tight ends in it, but tight end 6 with 8.7 half PPR points tells you where we are with tight end, where we went from feeling like this is pretty deep to Darnell Washington is tight end 6 with 8.7 points. So the idea that
thank goodness Mark Andrews had his spin-off QB sneak 35-yard touchdown run, or he'd have been tight end 5.
Yes, exactly. Brock Wright is a guy that can be involved in the red zone, that he's going to be on there every single down almost. And when you're desperate, when you're looking at, I'm screwed. Like I've lost Dalton Kincaid. I've lost Sam LaPorta. I'm relying on Kyle Pitts playing with Kirk Cousins. Brock Wright might catch a touchdown, and that might look pretty appealing right now.
Yeah, I think that's what you're hoping for with Brock Wright, is that he can catch a touchdown. I mean, you're not finding many high-volume tight ends off the waiver wire at this point in the season. Well, Jeff, any other? I think we talked about all the injuries. Any other major takeaways from Week 11 or final thoughts for today's show?
An injury, but not quite an injury. So Luke Musgrave got benched at halftime, and they signed Josh Wiley off the practice squad, and he caught a touchdown. Josh Wiley had some momentum with the Titans before they drafted Gunnar Helm. So that's just one that just the kind of the guy that everybody, you talk about tight ends, you talk about deep tight ends, everybody was ready for Luke Musgrave to take over the job. It seems like he's already lost that opportunity there, but just something that I noticed today.
Yeah, and I talked with Sigmund Bloom about that too. Is there was a lot of hope that like Luke Musgrave would just step into Tucker Kraft's role, and I was like, no, he's more of a vertical threat. Like I think he needs Christian Watson to go down to like really break out, and John Fitzpatrick is the guy that I'd expect to get some of that short distance and then the screens and whatnot. But it'll be interesting to see if Josh Wiley can maintain his role there. But I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in. Jeff and I will be back later this week. I want to thank y'all so much for tuning in, and we will see you then.